and welcome back to my channel. In this week's video, you have week 1 of Realmathon. Yes, there were 3 days in the previous vlog that were part of Realmathon, but this is the first full week in there, and I have 2 books to talk about. One I finished yesterday. Well, no, I finished it Sunday. Could have talked about it yesterday. Anyway, you don't need to know all that. And that is The Book Wanderers. I'll briefly talk about points. I got a total of 43 positive points for this one. I don't remember the individual prompts, but as far as the bonus prompts go, I got 10 points for the page count. I also got 10 points for being more than 51% read, and also 10 points for person on the cover. The setup for this is every book lover's dream, especially as a kid. This is a middle grade book. Tilly, short for Matilda, lives in, I think, somewhere in London, in the UK, with her grandparents. She lives there because her mother disappeared shortly after she was born, and her grandparents have told her that her father died before she was born. So she never knew her father, and her grandparents didn't know much about him either. She loves to read. Her grandparents own this bookshop called Pages & Co., and their last name is Pages. She is at the beginning of this, I think a beginning of a new school year. And she sort of had an off-page falling out with a friend, is trying to sort things out. She starts seeing certain people around the store that she's not expecting to be there. She sees a person interacting with her grandmother, who she calls Lizzie, and a person interacting with her grandfather, who wears a deerskin cap and smokes a pipe, obviously Sherlock Holmes. And she sees and interacts with 2 girls, Anne with an E, and also Alice, because those are her favorite books. So it turns out that there are people who are called book wanderers, meaning they can pull characters out of a book, like she's done with Anne and Alice, but they can also go into books. And that sets off the whole story here with this opening of the series. I expected to love it a lot more than I did. This is not a bad book. This is probably a 4-star read for me. I'm definitely going to be continuing on with the series. One of the things that I did not expect was the more serious nature to this book. A lot of the middle grade books that I've been reading recently, especially in the Rick Riordan Presents Imprints line, there's a tone of cheeky humor that no matter who the author is of those books, it infects the series as a whole. That's sort of what that series is known for. This book really didn't have that, and I didn't necessarily expect it to have that, but I've been in that rut, so my mind was kind of expecting it. But this is a lot more serious. Like, the stakes are a lot high. It's not like overwhelming and heavy and oppressive. It's just that the stakes in here are a lot higher. So I like where the book went. I did question it at first. When she first meets Anne, and she's asking all of these things, and Anne is saying all of these things, why it took her so long to figure out that that was a character from a book. It's supposed to be her favorite book. I'm sorry, when someone says Anne with an E, you can oh, you mean Anne of Green Gables. And not that you think that they were a character, but anyway, that's a minor note. I love the magic system that Anna James opens and explores in here, the possibilities of it. Tilly, the main character, is a little bit frustrating because she's told all of these rules about how to wander in books, not to get too close to the end pages or you might get stuck, and like always have the book with you so you can read the last line to get yourself out of the book, and all of these certain things and things that she's told, and that she constantly goes against them. And now I know that's a thing for middle grade books, but it's kind of like she's set up as this fairly rule following girl, but then she goes and does things that you know are not the right decision. You know, this is not going to end well, and they don't. My expectations were to fall head over heels in love with this book, and so a little bit of my, what you could call negativity, is just because it didn't meet my high expectations for the book. However, it is still a really good book. I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the series. The same cannot be said for the next book that I read, and that is one of my arcs, Canyon Masters and the Peerless Magic Crew. The synopsis made this out to be a book about magic, a kid going to a magical school and finding out all about magic. I start reading though, and I'm like, oh, this is sci-fi, near futuristic sort of dystopian world. But then I go back and I look at the synopsis, and yes, it does talk about magic. I'm like, okay, I don't see the magic parts of this. I was kind of confused. So I keep reading. There are certain jumps and certain twists that don't really make a lot of sense. So Kenyon, does not want to go to Peerless Academy. He's gotten this invite, he's gotten accepted, but he doesn't want to go. And so somehow he convinces his parents, even after his parents have somewhat been brainwashed into making him go, he somehow convinces them that he's not going to go. But then something happens and he changes his mind and he goes. Why could we not just cut that whole part out there? Anyway, so he goes to this academy and he's meeting people, he's assembling a crew, as you are wont to do in this sort of book, and you start getting hints of things not being right. This school is supposed to be academically like challenging and super amazing, but they won't let them do two different kinds of art at the same time, like music and writing together. You can't do that together. And you get these hints that this school seems nefarious, and then you get into the magic itself, and the magic seems horrific, and you find out that yeah, it was broken, it was corrupted, etc., but doing this will fix it. But then he attempts to do it and something goes wrong and he makes it worse. And I'm like, I thought you said that would make it better. A lot of it just didn't make sense. The world building in here utterly failed this book. There's just a lot of stuff in here that does not make sense. Even if sequels were announced, because it says it's supposed to be a series, no sequels are really announced. It says it's a series on Storygraph, but not on Goodreads, and nothing's been announced, and everything's set up for him to try to fix things. After all, it leaves off on a cliffhanger. It just felt weird. It was not terrible. Like, I didn't hate my experience, but I also didn't really enjoy it either. It just felt slapdash together, and this is not this author's main genre. He also doesn't normally write for middle grade. It didn't work, unfortunately. Okay, I am back with my last clip of the vlog, a much longer clip. I'm just remembering that last night, or sometime yesterday, I sat down, tried to figure out, like, enter all of my stuff for the readathon, for Realmathon, because I was going to put it on a little sticky note and put it on the books so I would know how many points I got for each book. But then I got distracted and updated the rest of my reading spreadsheet and never did that. I'm not going to pause to go do that now. But anyway, I will mention the extras that I earned, like cover color, was it a school setting, the item cover, which is a person on the cover for my realm, and I'm just going to move on from there. So I should have come and updated several times in between this update and the last ones, because I've read lots of books. You know, I mentioned that I do kind of have the goal of trying to read at least a book a day, or the equivalent thereof, and now I'm trying to challenge myself and make it a little bit more than that. And because of that, I'm reading the books quickly and not necessarily keeping up with my written reviews, because I want to do the written reviews first, because that helps me gather all of my thoughts, put that all together so that I can come and give the best update here. And also I want to stay on track with that. I want to prioritize the written reviews. And so because I hadn't written the written reviews for a couple of these, I put off doing the update. And so now I have 5 books to update about that I have finished, and one that I haven't quite finished what I'm going to read of it, but I am going to DNF. I'll start with that one first in just a moment. But anyway, that's why this update is going to be longer, and I need to get a little bit better on that, but it's still a work in progress. But I am very thankful to this readathon, because it has definitely gotten me back on my reading mojo, getting into these books, reading a lot. So far this month, I have read, I think I'm at 10 books. But let's move into the negative, the disappointing. That is The Elephant in the Room by Holly Goldberg Sloan. Now, at the time that I am updating, I have read about 30% or so of it on audiobook. It's not very long. It's about 5.5 hours on audiobook, and I'm listening to it at faster than 1 times speed. When I purchased the book, it sounded really intriguing. But since purchasing the book, I have heard some not so great things about certain aspects of it. And so I already went into this book with lowered expectations, But then I started listening, and at first I'm like, okay, maybe lowering my expectations was the right way to go about it. Maybe I'm going to end up enjoying this. It's already had 4 different perspectives, narrative perspectives in here. You would think that because this is a middle grade book, it's going to have the narrative perspective of the middle grader, who is, I guess, supposed to be the main character in here. No, it shifts, and there's been a lot so far, even at the 30% mark, of this older guy. So, okay, let me back up and give you the setup for this. So the main character, whose name I forget, I think it's Salima, something like that. She is Turkish, but she's born in America. Her parents are both immigrants. Something goes wrong with her mother's immigration status, and she has to go back to Turkey or Iran. I forget which one now. I feel bad about that. But she has to go back to get all of that sorted out. I think it is Turkey. But anyway, she has to go back to get all that sorted out. It's supposed to be 8 days. At the time of the story, it's been 8 months, and they don't know when or if she'll be able to come back. And so she's really sad. The dad's really sad as well. He, I believe, is a mechanic and ends up going out to fix the old truck of this guy who didn't grow up with money, but he went in with 23 other people on a lottery ticket. It was a huge payout, and so he has a lot of money. But he's also now grieving because, I don't know how recently, but his wife has passed. Through that, they sort of get connected. And that's where the first narrative perspective shifts. You get a lot from that old guy. Okay, fine, if it were like an adult novel, but I'm like, what middle schooler wants to read the perspective of an old guy? I don't know how old this guy is supposed to be. I'm like, okay, that's weird. Then it ends up that they want to do something special for him. They take him to this donut shop, which is sort of like a pop-up store, but it's used frequently for people with big trucks and whatever when they pull off the interstate, because it's got a big parking lot. And while they're there celebrating his birthday, this family-run circus pulls off, and they've just done their last show because they can't keep up with the new regulations for the better treatment of the animals. This circus has an elephant and a bear. The main character, or who I think is supposed to be the main character, sorry about the dings, she loves elephants and is obsessed with it. And so the old guy, who still has a lot of money from that lottery winning, decides to purchase these. Along the way, after he decides to purchase these animals, you also get the perspective of the not so ethical circus owner. Why do I need a perspective from him? Then you get a perspective from the elephant. When that first happened, I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? To top it all off, about the point when I stopped listening to it, and yes, I am going to go back to it to get to the 50% mark because I want to be able to count this and earn some points for Realmathon. You get the perspective from the bear. Why? Why do we need all these perspectives? We don't. I don't understand the purpose of this story. So it will be a DNF, just not quite yet. Okay, so now let's get into the books that I did actually finish. And I'm going to start off with a book that helps me move along in my series goal, my goal to clear off all of the series that I started prior to starting watching BookTube and starting my own BookTube channel. And that is reading the second book in the Renegades series, which is Arch Enemies. So this book got me bonus points for people on the cover and also bonus points for the more than 51% red on the cover. So this book, I'm not going to talk too much about the plot because obviously it is the second book of the series. But the setup for this series, which is called the Renegade series, and that's the name of the first book in the series, is you have this world where superheroes really exist. And they've existed throughout history, but they've been looked down upon, they've been targeted, they've been ostracized, etc. But then there's this point where you have two sides of these superheroes who end up clashing because they have differing views on how what they call prodigies should be treated. You have the renegades who end up winning, and you have the villains, but they're called something else. The anarchists? It's frustrating, but I can't remember what the other side is called. So in the first book, you're introduced to Nova, who is the niece of the guy who led the side who lost. And she harbors a huge grudge against the renegades because Like, she is a prodigy herself. And she ended up saving herself when her entire family, including her baby sister, were killed by this gang. She blames the renegades for not coming. Like, she believed in them, that they would come, and that's why she held out and didn't do anything. And she blames them for the death of her family. She's also listening to, and has been listening to, the poison of her uncle for years. So she doesn't like them. But part of the revenge is becoming a renegade herself. Like, they hold trials every so often where prodigies can compete to see if their talent is good enough for them to be a renegade, etc. And so she ends up infiltrating the renegades and getting onto a team with the goal of bringing them down. So she's living a double life. And that is the goal. Like, she's still living that double life in this second book here. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about how Marissa Meyer was able to structure this series, and the fact that there's so many times that things happen where you think, it's gotta be revealed. It's gotta be revealed. Especially since the other main character, Adrian, his dads, adopted dads, are like two of the leading renegades, people that Nova hates significantly. But he has the power of like drawing things to life, basically. And he's figured out that with tattooing himself with his own imagery, he can actually give himself more powers, but he hasn't told anyone about this. And so he has a double life as the Sentinel, who's like vigilante justice, you know, superheroes of full. And so they're both living these double lives and also coming together because they are on the same renegade team. And there's various things that are happening where, are the renegades as good as they're supposed to be? Is Nova's side really as bad as they're supposed to be? What is the actual answer? And Marissa Meyer continues that story in here, and I was engaged the whole time. A lot of my thoughts, I'm not going to talk about in this video because it is the second book in the series, and it does, upon reflection, give away some things from the first one. But this was definitely a solid middle book in this series, and I really hope that she sticks the landing in the finale to the trilogy. I don't know when I'll read this. I won't read it this month because it's basically an all blue cover, so I couldn't read it for Realmathon. And I'll be right back. It's getting a little warm in here. Okay, I had to go change my shirt. It's still the same day. The next book I'm going to talk about is one of my ARC copies that I read as an audiobook. I do not have a physical copy of that, and that is Adia Kalbara and the Circle of Shamans. Now, unlike Kenyan Masters and the Peerless Magic Crew, this book did this unique Afrocentric fantasy, how it should be done. It was really good. So the points that I earned for it are school setting and also people on the cover. I don't get the color. In this story, you have Adia, and she's living with her aunt and uncle because her parents have died, and they don't really like her. And I have a feeling that later on in the series, we'll find out why they don't necessarily like her, and her aunt is her mom's half-sister. Adia has what she thinks are negative powers that sort of manifest sometimes, and she thinks she's being inhabited by a demon. She wants to get out of this area because she does not like how the missionaries are controlling all of the people with these drops, making them very pliable. And that was an excellent aspect that E.C. Hendricks put into the story to show the unfortunate reality of how a lot of missionaries used this idea of the religion and distorted it to control the people. It's awful. And so she ends up getting to leave and go to this place that is supposed to be a school for shamans. But it's been, you could say, infected or taken over by people who really don't have these shamanistic abilities. They just think that they do, and it's a parody of what it used to be. But the school itself is magical, like the building itself is magical and fighting against all of these different things. And some unjust things happen where she finds out a secret that's not supposed to be able to be told to people because of a curse, but she finds a loophole, not intentionally. And she gets involved in this story where there are figures who are not necessarily gods or goddesses, but they're like descendants of stars or something. I don't remember that exactly, but the way that it unfolds is brilliant. And I love Adia as a character. She has such growth in this story, And there's such potential for her to grow even more in the future stories. I really enjoyed this, and I can't wait to get a physical copy. Now, all of those and the others that I will talk about, I read via audiobook. Now, this next one is the only one that I read physically and finished this week. I've started another one, but this one I'll talk about a little bit more of the details. It's a longer read, and it was a lot denser, and it didn't necessarily flow as quickly as I would have wanted. But it's These Burning Stars by Bethany Jacobs. Now, on this one, I get person on the cover. I also get more than 50% red. This is a sci-fi novel, and it's an incredibly unique setup. So you have the kingdom, not the kingdom, but the kingdom. There's no G in there. At first, when I was reading it, I thought it was misspelled. It's not. No, when I was looking at the name of the series, it's the Kingdom trilogy. I thought, is that misspelled? It's not misspelled. In this world, you have a lot of complex politics. You have 3 different branches of government. You have the cloaks, you have the clerics, and I think it's the archivists, but I can't remember where exactly. And at the top of that, they're called the Hand, or the whole organization is called the Hand. I don't remember exactly. But you also have rich and influential families scattered throughout this world. And the kingdom is like a series of planets. It's interstellar travel. And it also plays with gender. You, at a certain point, are able to choose your gender, and you carry a gender mark so that people can look at it and see, oh, okay, this is this person's gender, and you're able to change that gender mark if you want to at any time. However, there are some people who go to what they call kin schools, and those kin schools are the places where the people who end up going on to become part of these other places. So the cloaks handle like the military part of it, the security, the policing part of it. The archivists are dealing with knowledge. I think we don't really have an archivist character, so I'm not 100% certain on that. And then you have the clerics, and I'm not really 100% certain on that one either, like what they're supposed to do, because the 2 clerics that we see that are 2 very important characters in this book do not act like clerics are supposed to act in this world. And that's told to you at the beginning. So I don't know how they're supposed to actually act. But backing up to what I was saying before, these kin schools are where these people come from. In the kin schools, if you are in the school, you are forbidden from choosing your gender mark or having a name until you finish with the school. And so throughout your time at the school, the pronouns used are it to refer to you, and also you are a number. So let's say your class has 6 people in it. Each one of those has a number, 1 through 6. I just remember looking at this and reading it. It's like before a person chooses their gender mark, they're referred to as it. And the use in the school, the forbidding of choosing a gender mark and being constantly referred to as it is so dehumanizing. And that's the purpose in these schools. It's utterly fascinating. Now to my experience with the book itself. At first, when I struggled really to get into it, I was so confused in the first 30 pages or so. And I sincerely thought about DNFing it and just cutting my losses with it. But I'm like, you know what? I wasn't in the right mindset. I was a little bit sleepy when I was getting a hold of it. I'm going to give it another shot. And I'm plodding through this. And things are interesting. They're fascinating, but they're also incredibly confusing. And I'm still not understanding some of these things. So you have 3 main perspectives. You have Essek, who is entirely unlikable. And that's the point of her character. You have Chono, who, okay, let me back up a little bit. With Essek is not necessarily the heir to one of these families, but she could be. And later is revealed to be. But she's also very high up in the cleric portion of the Hand. And those 2 positions are not supposed to go together. There's conflicts. These families and the Hand are supposed to be separate. And that's part of the driving plot. But she's very capricious and brutal and strategizing. You're not supposed to like her. And it opens up with this incident where she's evaluating a class. You know, there's 6 people in it. It's an incredibly brutal scene. Like the demonstration that is given to her is of each student in turn basically fighting against the other 5 students. Of course, they're overwhelmed. In that scene, in that incident, there's set up this intense hatred and obsession between Essek and one of the students, the sixth student in the line. The obsession goes both ways, but you don't have 6 as a narrative perspective in the story. In that same class, you have 4, who is later revealed to be Chono, another one of the main perspectives in this. Chono goes on to become a cleric and is a main perspective in the story. And then you also have a third perspective of June, who is not part of the hand. She's doing sort of back alley stuff. She's a caster, so like she's a hacker, and she ends up connected to Essek and Chono in a way where Essek, in her obsession with 6th, has caused some tragedies along the way. And so you have all 3 of these perspectives. And for a long time, I was frustrated because you wouldn't get enough of the perspectives that I preferred. I vastly preferred to be in Chono and June's perspective because they were characters that you could empathize with. Essek, I did not like Essek at all, but that's the point. I was struggling to understand all of this groundwork, all of this slog, this intense political machinations, all sorts of things working back and forth. I still don't understand how all of these narrative threads combine, interact, etc. But there was a point with the last 100 pages or so when everything starts falling in place and certain things get hinted at, and then you figure out the reveal. Like, you're supposed to figure out the reveal at that point, and then it gets actually revealed. And when all of that stuff comes into play, comes together, that's the sort of stuff that I absolutely love. And I remember finishing the book after reading this last section of about 100 pages going, how did you do that? How did you do that, Jacobs? Now I desperately want to read the second book because it became something so much more by the end of this story. And it is fascinating. So I ended up rating this 4 stars because of that very slow beginning. But if Jacobs is able to keep up all of the groundwork that she has laid in this book, this is going to be a fascinating trilogy for me. Now we get to the other 2 books that I finished, and one of the reasons that I've been able to keep up so much with like the number of like a book a day is because I read these as audiobooks, and middle grade audiobooks, like the font and the spacing is bigger, so the audiobooks aren't as long, and I listen at faster than 1x speed. And the first of those is Treasure Island by Jewel Parker Rhodes. I've read a few other books by Jewel Parker Rhodes. My favorite of hers is Black Brother, Black Brother. I think the author is the reason that I requested this as an ARC. Now, the points that I earned for this were just person on the cover. I didn't earn other bonuses because it's not majority read and it's not a school setting. As I was reading this, I realized I don't think I have actually ever read the original Treasure Island, of which this is a retelling. I probably should have refamiliarized, or in this case, initially familiarized myself with the story. I think it would have helped some of the things make sense in this book. So it is basically a retelling set in modern day New York City. The main character is Zane. He and his friends, they live in Rockaway. His dad died from some disease, I don't know what it is, and his mom has to take in boarders to their house to make ends meet. And one of these boarders is this eccentric woman who is acting like a pirate. They call her Captain Maddie. Something happens where she ends up getting this black dot, and it immediately made me think of the Doctor Who episode, which is one of my favorites. I think it's a 2-parter, but I don't remember. Anyway, so she ends up passing away, but after giving Zane her cane and what turns out to be a treasure map. And there's a lot of different things explored in this book. Another big factor in this is that Zane loves skateboarding. Both he and his friends love it. And a lot of the metaphors of sailing in here are placed in reference to skateboarding. So both sides in this battle, because there are pirates, this bad like skateboarding gang, the skateboarding is used as the sailing references in here, which I'm like, oh, okay. It felt a little weird. Those references seemed a bit forced to me. They didn't seem to make a lot of sense, but I was willing to give a pass on that. But at the same time, he and his friends, they go off, they're trying to figure out this map, trying to find the treasure. Zane thinks it's going to make their life so much easier. His mom's not going to have to work as hard. They won't have to rent out the room, etc. Rooms, I should say. But a lot of the things that they get involved with in this book are like incredibly serious, but they're not treated that way. But at the same time, a lot of incredibly serious real life issues are also going on in the lives of all of these different characters. And so for most of the book, it felt like these two puzzle pieces were trying to be jammed together in the same story, and they weren't fitting. And because there was such a struggle to try to make those fit, I never was able to get into the narrative itself. It's not that Rhodes' writing is bad in here. Her writing still is really well done, and there's a lot of good aspects in it, but that cognitive dissonance, trying to put those two things together, never really worked for me. It wasn't fantastical enough. It was too rooted in reality. It's hard to explain exactly why. So this wasn't a bad book. Just in my opinion, it didn't necessarily work. So this ended up getting a 3.5 stars for me. And then the last one that I finished is book 4 in the Sisters Grimm series, which is Once Upon a Crime. I really loved book 2. Book 3 sort of was a step down. Book 4 brings it right back up. In book 4, they are trying to save someone's life. I'm not going to get into a lot of the details, but as part of it, I'll actually return to this in just a moment. I got to change the battery. So picking up where I left off before the battery so rudely interrupted me, most of this book, all of this book, does not take place in Fairy Tale Landing, which was like that town, you know, once upon a time TV show, etc. It actually takes place in New York City, where Sabrina and Daphne, the Grimm's sisters, spent most of their life before their parents were abducted by this criminal gang that they're trying to figure out, the big bads of the entire series, the Red Hand. And I loved the new setting. Like, the new setting breathed life into this series, and it brought in a whole lot of other different fairy tale creatures and like literary creatures. Like, it expanded beyond fairy tales to bring in like literary characters, I should say, because you have Oz, you have Ebenezer Scrooge and Tiny Tim, and a few others. Like, you have ones from A Midsummer Night's Dream, from Fairy. I was able to suspend my disbelief for it, but I was under the assumption that the Grimm brothers, like the whole setup for this and the town that they created, they came over in the 1700s, or at least the early 1800s. Dickens and L. Frank Baum, they weren't writing until much later. So the connection there, I'm like, how, like, I love all of these literary character references, but it doesn't quite fit with the lore of this world. Because this book is so rooted in the fantasy, I'm able to give them a pass on that, although I was thinking about that at certain times, which is different than Treasure Island Runaway Gold that I just talked about. But in this, I loved the inclusion of these different characters. You had expanded roles for some of the characters that had been in the series for a while, and you had some characters reach the heights, reach the fullness of their arc and sort of roll out of the series, maybe to be referenced later, and you had some new characters enter the chat, so to speak. And I love the exploration here. I also really enjoyed seeing the growth in Sabrina, who's basically the main character in this. I hope that growth will stay, because there's been a couple examples of growth in Sabrina in the previous 2 books, but she seems to regress a little bit at the start of each book, and it's almost like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So it's not a full regression. She's not learning the same thing every time. So I hope that we're seeing some actual permanent growth in Sabrina, but overall, this was an excellent entry in the system. I read this one and plan to read book 5, because book 5 is a red cover, which gives me more bonus points. In this one, I get only the person on the cover bonus for that, because it's not a school setting either. Of the books that I have physically in front of me, I don't have all of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm missing several. I can't remember what ones that I started this week with, so the ones that I hold up are probably not going to match the ones that I read in total this week. I've noticed that when I get to editing at the end of the week, I'm like, oh, I actually read that one during this week. But there are a couple that I read that I do not have physical copies of. obviously I can't hold those up. So overall, today is the 10th. I have read 10 books. I'm about halfway through another book physically, well, a little under halfway, and then I'll be starting another audiobook. Unfortunately, I am not going to be obviously counting this one as a book read, or I would stay on track to be a book ahead just because it takes me so long to read the physical books throughout the week. But spring break starts on Friday, although Friday is a teacher work day for me. I'm not really going to be working. I'm going to bring a book with me, but I hope to get a lot of books read this upcoming week. Who knows how long this video is going to be for next week and whether or not I can break it up into more updates than just, I think, the 2, maybe 3 that I've had this week. We're doing pretty well for Team Blood in Realmathon. I'm really excited about that, and thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.